Hey everybody, it's Mike here from the WeWrench shop. Welcome to episode 15, where we get into the really good stuff, where we begin to tear down the legendary S38B36 power plant for the E34 M5. If you like what you see, make sure you support the channel by liking, subscribing, or commenting. Stay tuned. All right, so this is the current state of affairs that we're at. We have the S38B36 power plant off of the cherry picker and onto the stand. Now I do have to give some miscellaneous notes here. Getting this engine off the cherry picker and onto the stand was a very difficult job because number one, I was working by myself, and number two, this engine is really big and really heavy. May not look like much in the video, but it just weighs a ton and it's very front heavy. So getting it off that cherry picker and onto the stand was an absolute nightmare. And I didn't film it. I started to film it and I was struggling so badly with it that I stopped because I just did not want to keep managing the camera. I just had to focus 100% on getting the job done. So in regards to this engine, there are a couple interesting things that had to be done. First off, BMW does not recommend that you mount the engine to a stand using the bell housing holes. That's very typical on all other engines. You mount it to the bell housing. BMW actually has a special plate that mounts to the side of the engine block, and you can mount the stand like this because they claim that if you use the bell housing, it will cause distortion in the cylinders. And I believe it because this engine is just ginormous. So you have to support the engine from the side of the block. And just remember something, if there was no truth to it, they would not be saying it. Don't think that you know more than the engineers who designed this power plant. They put it in the factory repair manual for a reason, that the engine must be supported that way. So I believe them. And I've seen a lot of stuff here and there with people mounting this engine from the bell housing holes. And I'm sorry, just the amount of money and the amount of time that it would take to properly rebuild this, I do not want to take any chances. So you can call me a Boy Scout, call me whatever you want. I'm doing it the way that they said to do it. So I came up with a lot of different ideas to design and mimic the engine mount plate. I could not find any information about it. I couldn't find any pictures of it online. I looked at old suppliers that sell BMW special tools. None of them have it. So I took the exhaust manifolds off the engine and I started to look at the engine mounting points. Now I know that they use the engine mount bracket as a point for an engine support plate, so that's what I used. Now, I was able to take the engine stand bolt and go directly to this casting here. That's where the engine mounting plate screws to, and then again here, and then again here. Actually, I don't think it screws here. I think it's here, and then there's two on the bottom. Yeah, see those two castings? That's where the engine mount plate goes, and then the engine mount mounts to the plate. So the engine stand, I was able to bolt directly there. These are M10 by 1.5 threads per millimeter, I believe. M10 by 1.5. I had a direct mount here. I had a direct mount here. Now on the top is where it got challenging. I had a hole here. But the thing is that the casting, the threads are 1 1/8 of an inch back further than this casting. So what I did was I took a piece of 1 inch square tubing, put some washers in the back of it to give me the appropriate spacing, and this has a 1/4 inch wall thickness, so it's pretty strong stuff. So I used that to get me the appropriate amount of space. Now the other interesting part was there was no casting on the block to mount to here. That hole is actually a mistake, and I'll explain why. But there is no casting on the block here for this engine stand mount point. So what I did was I welded some plate to the 1-inch square tubing, so I can mount that to the bell housing, and that is sturdy enough for the engine mount, or the engine stand rather, to screw to. So this plate I fabricated, again, it's 1-inch square tubing, welded some plate to the end to mount it here. This bolt passes through and mounts to the block, and then this I just drilled and tapped so I could run a bolt through and it mounts. So long story short, you don't need that fancy engine support plate. You can do it with some 1-inch square tubing. You can get it at Home Depot. Pretty easy to fab that up. And I can have faith because this engine is going to be on the stand for quite a while. And I do not want to create a situation where my measurements are going to go off, or just, you know, that's a nightmare scenario to me, that block becomes distorted. So another note that you'll see, there's this strapping. It's mounted to the bell housing here. And then I just mounted it to the engine stand. The reason being because this engine is very front heavy. I left the accessories on it because I didn't want to, I wanted to just give everybody the best experience they can. I didn't want to miss anything. I didn't want to take things off without being able to film it. So I left the engine as intact as I could. So with all the accessories on it, it was very front heavy. And I was taking it off of the cherry picker, and it was basically just tilting. It was not standing up straight. So I just installed that strapping in the back in order to anchor it down so it doesn't rotate and kind of fall to the front. And let's see what else happened. I wanted to get this coolant manifold off of here, and you can see that a bolt broke. The bolt broke inside, and then the screw extractor broke inside of the bolt. So I can get that off. I just have to pull the cylinder head off first, and I can just, you know, this could, I hope I didn't break that. These are no longer available from BMW, I think. Oh, these are fine. Yeah, I'll just, with the head off, I'll be able to just twist this, and we'll be able to get that out of there. So this is the engine on the stand, and we're going to begin tearing it down. And one other detail that I forgot to mention, I did take the headers off of this engine. The headers had to be removed in order to fabricate the engine mounting plate, or mounting bar, whatever you want to call it. And I do apologize, but it was, again, a non-stop fight. A lot of these studs broke. The nuts were seized. I mean, all it was just me heating and squirting and drilling and extracting. It really sucked. This is what E34 M5 headers look like. They're stainless steel. The workmanship on these is really incredible. They're just like, I mean, you don't see this kind of work in an OEM. These ports right here, this is for a carbon monoxide measurement. They had a tool at the dealership where you would, I guess, balance the cylinders, and you hooked up a carbon monoxide meter to each of those ports to measure it in the exhaust. These holes are for secondary air. That's the way it looked when I took it off. When I had these headers off in 2005, I had a friend of mine in the shop just weld these holes. This is where the secondary air actually entered the exhaust ports. I can't believe those welds held up, because I mean, it was just like a MIG weld, a steel MIG weld. Those could be leaking, who knows? There could be a pinhole. I think I'm going to cut those out. I don't know. All I do know is that if I keep all these ports and bungs on this exhaust, it could restrict the flow. I mean, that definitely causes some turbulence in the exhaust gas. So maybe what I'll do is I'll cut these out, weld the holes up, and I'll cut out the secondary air ports as well, just to get some better flow. Headers for this car are like prohibitively expensive. Super Sprint makes them. They're stainless steel. They're like $3,500 or something ridiculous. But that could be a nice performance upgrade if I choose to do it. First thing we'll do is we'll get the pressure plate and clutch disc out of here. 6mm Allen screws. Not in bad shape. Next are the flywheel bolts. Smell the Loctite on these as they're coming apart. This is not the stock flywheel. This is a JB Racing aluminum flywheel. Pretty nice. Rear main seal doesn't look too bad. It's kind of crazy that that lasted that long. Don't forget to bag and tag. With the clutch, disc, pressure plate, and flywheel removed, a really cool shot of the back of the bell housing. Rear main seal doesn't look too bad. There's a little crust in there. That wet oil that you see, that's from coolant dripping down when I undid this top pipe here. So, and I haven't replaced that rear main seal. That rear main seal I think is original, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Next step is to come around to the side of the engine. We're going to remove this coolant manifold. This is a really cool feature that I believe is unique to this engine. It has this kind of like coolant distributor, and it has a port for each cylinder, which is kind of neat. It comes off the thermostat housing there. So we're going to remove that. And we're going to come around the front and remove the thermostat housing and just continue with all the accessories. To get the thermostat housing off, you have to undo this hose clamp here, which is already done. And then there's a nut here, 10mm nut, and then there's this sort of bolt that has like a nut stud on it. That's to hold some ancillary equipment in the front there. So once you take this nut off, once you take this off, you also have to disconnect this hose over here by the water pump. You should be able to pop this manifold out. All right, we're going to pull the side cooling manifold, and it is a bunch of 10 mils. Next, we're going to take the distributor cap off. 3 8mm bolts right there, there, and there. Distributor rotor, 3mm Allen. T45 Torx for the inner rotor. And 2 10 mils for this cover plate. Now this has kind of an interference fit. It's actually an O-ring seal in this. See that? Harness mount. Crankshaft position sensor. All right, vibration dampeners next. Here's that famous crank bolt. I screamed my guts out. 578 foot-pounds of torque on this bad boy. Next thing on the list is the secondary air pump and compressor. Got a 10mm bolt here. No, it's not a 10. And we can go down to here where the mount is. There are nuts on this one. bolts on the side and the front. I'm really grateful for all the support that I've received so far. Make sure you check us out on all of our social media channels, Facebook at WeWrench Official, Instagram at WeWrench Official, and TikTok at WeWrench. So you can see the amazing progress on this project. My dream car, BMW E34 M5, complete rebuild and restoration.